It's the fourth week of July 2025. I'm Dave. I'm here with Andrew, and you're listening to BV Weekly. This week we talk Ozzy, Hayley, New Tyler, the other New Tyler, and more. If I sound sick, it's because I am. But I actually been fighting this bronchitis thing since our last episode. I was starting to go hoarse like while we were recording last week, and a week later this thing won't go away still. But yeah, how are you?
Well, I'm doing better than you.
Yeah, I hope I sound okay. Sorry if I cough in your ear.
You sound good to me. Sorry you're still dealing with that.
Yeah. So this week has been defined by before we found out Ozzy passed and since we found out Ozzy passed. So, you know, we'll get into that in a little bit, but like, did you do anything good this weekend?
Nothing music related. What about you?
I haven't seen any shows. Been like I've been sick, but it's also been quiet time. But I was in New Jersey this weekend. A lot of New Jersey trips I've been covering on this podcast. I was in New Jersey for a big birthday party, a sleepover birthday party. So Saturday night, I slept there, and then just like old times, like I'm imagining I'm a little kid. I actually had sleepovers with this same person when we were like 7 years old as well. And then Sunday morning, I got to shoot guns. This was part of the party. So we did skeet shooting on Sunday morning. And so I was in New Jersey. And this is also the same weekend that Zach Bryan played 3 nights at MetLife Stadium. So I'm, of course, a big Zach Bryan fan and wanting to go see one of these shows, but I didn't make it Friday. Saturday night was the party. And now Sunday, we're done shooting and it's like 1 p.m. I don't have a ticket, but I'm like, I'm just going to drive over and maybe I'll buy a ticket at the last second. And right next door is that massive mall called American Dream, which I'd actually never been to. So I'm like, and by the way, I wasn't even feeling that well. I had what I have now then too. But I go to the mall and people are also parking at the mall to go to the concert. So I essentially showed up along with many other Zach Bryan fans, it was also kind of a perfectly themed day, right? I'm like shooting rifles in the morning and then walking among countless people in cowboy hats and cowboy boots in the afternoon, all getting ready to go to the country show and punk show. This is the Front Bottoms opened all 3 shows. But yeah, so I'm just walking around American Dream, which was actually super entertaining. It's like part amusement park, part mall, a million restaurants, food courts. There's like food courts everywhere. This is like a giant mall. And so I'm just walking around going to stores, but like every few minutes I keep checking StubHub and TickPick and all the sites that sell tickets, thinking like maybe a cheap ticket will come up, but also I didn't feel like going because I don't feel good. I didn't really feel like sitting through Kings of Leon, who are also open. Finally, like right before doors, I'm standing in the parking garage looking out at the venue. People in cowboys hats showing up every 5 seconds, walking by me. And I just decided, I'm going home. Tickets also were like insanely expensive. So this was a factor. And they continued to go up. I thought like right before doors, all the tickets that were left would go down. No, the opposite was happening. Despite him playing 3 nights in a row, like 80,000 people each night, tickets are still going up on the Sunday night right before door, like $300, like minimum for a ticket. And so anyway, I went home. Of course, what happens at that show? Bruce Springsteen comes out and they play Atlantic City together. I'm not mad. Still happy I went home. Anyway, that was the closest I came to going to a show this week.
Well, if we're talking about shows we wished we went to this week, I do wish I went to Tyler, the Creator last night at Under the K Bridge. Another venue we keep bringing up on this show.
Yeah, and last we spoke, we said Tyler was in the midst of this 6-show New York City run.
Yeah, and he still has 2 Prudential Center shows left.
Right, so then it became 7 when he announced this last minute show, which was in celebration of a last minute album, which we
Yeah.
also didn't even know would exist last week.
Right.
So that was like, he played Barclays Center in Brooklyn on Friday, and that was maybe the first place he started teasing this new album that ended up coming out on Monday.
Yeah, I think he announced it officially at this Barclays show on Friday.
There was like a cube or something outside that had the picture of it.
Yeah. And then I was actually in Cape Cod with the in-laws this weekend, and we came home Monday, and I played the Tyler record twice in a row in the car before reading his statement that the album is meant to be listened to while you're dancing, running, moving around, driving, something. Like, he's just like, don't be sitting still. And I was like, oh, well, I inadvertently did it the way he wanted me to. And I also loved it off the bat. And if you didn't love it off the bat, maybe you were sitting still. So
there you go.
But we'll talk more about Tyler later, because I would like to talk about Ozzy before we do that, because I do feel like really that's what's been on my mind ever since Tuesday. Like you said, I think it's the week is pretty before and after that. We talked on the show about Black Sabbath when they did their final show just 2.5 weeks ago, and it did feel like, you know, with Ozzy's health, that it was also somewhat of a public goodbye. But I still did not realize that, you know, 2 weeks later we would be talking about Ozzy's passing.
Yeah, obviously after Ozzy died, every single other member of Black Sabbath issued their own statements. But Tony Iommi also talked to ITV News this week since then. Tony said he didn't think Ozzy looked good through the rehearsals. And he said, quote, "I think he really just held out to do that show. I really feel," and me and Geezer were talking about it last night, that we think he held out to do it. And just after that, he's done it and said goodbye to the fans. And that was the end of it, really.
Yeah. And I mean, it's amazing that he was able to do this big final show, because not every celebrity story has such a neat ending, you know? And it does kind of feel like, you know, David Bowie getting his album out 3 days before he died, something like that. It just feels like he really got to tie the bow on his career. And then it's that other thing too, where just that show is always going to be so different now in hindsight. Like, you know, I know you were looking at like footage of him doing Mama, I'm Coming Home, and it's like, it was already the last public performance probably of that song, but now it's officially the last time he ever sang that song, and it just hits different, you know?
Definitely. Yeah, people are sharing clips from that show in retrospect, and it's like, you know, him talking about it being his last time, and just really hits you.
Yeah.
A lot of people are eulogizing Black Sabbath and Ozzy, obviously. And one of the big narratives that everyone says is that Black Sabbath invented metal. Can you explain why that is true?
Yeah. I think I'll preface that by saying, like, one, I never like to give credit to one artist for inventing a genre, because I always feel like it's more often just kind of like a combination of things. And two, when you do often have that artist that does get the credit, a lot of times, like, it's more like proto that genre than that genre.
Like Iggy Pop and punk, or Stooges
Yeah, exactly.
and punk.
Like, to me, like, Search and Destroy is absolutely a punk song. I Want to Be Your Dog is absolutely a punk song. But, like, are the Stooges consistently a punk band? Probably not. You know, I guess the Ramones probably deserve the credit for being the first consistently a punk band. And I think Black Sabbath and the Ramones, there's a lot of parallels there. But yeah. So anyway, this is all to say that I think that Black Sabbath, like, when you listen to their very first album in 2025, it still sounds like our current definition of metal. And I think that separates them from a lot of other pioneers.
And so meanwhile, when we say heavy metal in the modern context, that's almost now considered a subgenre. And metal, which has broken into countless subgenres: thrash metal, death metal, glam metal, gothic metal, doom metal, black metal. So some would say Black Sabbath is now more associated with traditional heavy metal, or pretty much the godfathers, especially of what we're calling doom metal, slower metal. So how are Black Sabbath the inventors of metal, but also prime examples of multiple subgenres of metal? And how do you get from Black Sabbath to a chaotic, screaming, crazy sounding subgenre like grindcore, for instance?
I mean, I think grindcore is really more rooted in punk than metal. But yeah, I mean, I think that like basically doom metal is like the first version of metal, because Black Sabbath were a doom band, which again, nobody called them a doom band at the time. Doom as a subgenre, you may as well just call it bands that sound like Black Sabbath. And so it's like basically like the first metal band is also a doom band. So I mean, it's even funny to think that like it feels like the first era of popular metal was what they called new wave of British heavy metal, but since it was already called the new wave, then it was already not the first wave. But like, you know, I think if you were to ask someone like to think of like the beginning of heavy metal, like you more would think of speed metal, I think. And Black Sabbath were much slower than that for the most part. Like Paranoid and Symptom of the Universe were fast songs that did invent speed metal and ultimately thrash metal. And I mean, I've also always felt like Paranoid is very punk too. Like it's very proto-punk, I guess. So like, yeah, I feel like they were primarily doing this slower thing that became known as doom metal. But they also were doing so much else. And I mean, that's why the band is so good. And also like Black Sabbath are one of those bands that like they have an insane amount of imitators, none of which have been able to do what Black Sabbath did. And I think it's because you very rarely, I don't know if you ever even find a band that like has it in them to capture the full scope of Black Sabbath. Like if you call doom bands that basically sound like Black Sabbath, yeah, but those are also just bands that sound like the heavy tracks on Master of Reality, pretty much. Like even that album is like half these like haunting sort of psychedelic folk songs. Like and then, you know, like Black Sabbath wrote Changes, which is not even metal. And Black Sabbath on their metal songs, like they were like Ozzy being such a fantastic singer, like his like the band that changed Ozzy's life is the Beatles. You know, like they were writing pop songs also. Like Iron Man and War Pigs and Paranoid are pop songs. Even the songs that weren't like the big hits like those, there's these pop hooks in them. And Ozzy is like this right in the forefront, this big clear singer. Like a lot of doom bands end up, like you said before, like you mentioned grindcore, but like a lot of doom bands scream or they bury the vocals in the mix. Like Ozzy put his voice front and center. And I don't know that bands who copy them, they probably don't do it because they can't do it. I'm sure that part of it is taste, but I also think that like, you know, I don't know how many bands have the ability to make songs as heavy and doomy as Black Sabbath that are also as radio friendly. And I think the answer to the screaming thing though is just like, you know, I mean, I think the development of metal is it's just sort of like, you know, you get Black Sabbath leads to Judas Priest, which leads to like Iron Maiden. And you just kind of like, by the early 80s, metal is generally a faster thing. And then you have the thrash bands pulling from speed metal as well as early hardcore. And so now metal is even faster. And because they're pulling from hardcore, the vocals are maybe more shouted. And so then from thrash metal, you get bands that are like, I want to do that, but even heavier. And then you get both black metal and death metal. And then the vocals there are like fully extreme, harsh vocals. Because I think that it's like if Slayer is, how can we be even heavier than the heaviest hardcore band? Then I feel like early black and death metal are like, how can we be Slayer but heavier? So I think that's like the answer to that question is it's like from Sabbath to speed metal to Slayer to death and black metal.
Yeah, you can trace it all back to Black Sabbath.
Right. Anyone who's doubting this point, I'm sure most listeners are just like nodding in agreement, being like, yeah, obviously. But if you're like thinking of a metal band that's newer that you're like, how can you possibly trace this to Sabbath? You can ask us in the comments somewhere. We'll respond next week. But yeah, and also like just to that point too, like I do get, you know, if you're like into like deathcore and you're like, I don't know that I think Black Sabbath is that heavy. Like, come on, like they don't scream. Like, I get it, but I also don't get it because I'm like, put on Sabbath Bloody Sabbath or Children of the Grave and turn it up, and like you don't need the context that it came out in the early 1970s. Like, I don't think it gets heavier than that. Like, I mean, I know it does, but it's like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, even though it gets heavier than that, those songs still out heavy the bands that are theoretically heavier than them. There's nothing about Black Sabbath that requires you to contextualize it being from a different time. Like, I do think that, you know, people will say like the Sonics are really the first punk band. Okay. You have to contextualize that you're listening to a record from like 1965. Like, the Sonics don't register as punk after you get Minor Threat and stuff like that. It's just not going to. But Black Sabbath, like, you don't need, like, if anything, in the opposite, where like we talked about this last time, where I'm like, how is Paranoid from 1970? Or the first Black Sabbath album, the track one on LP one, the song Black Sabbath by the band Black Sabbath on the album Black Sabbath. That riff is one of the heaviest riffs of all time. You can't really write a riff that is like significantly heavier than the Black Sabbath riff. And I think that that's the thing. It's the opposite case where you often have to be like, well, I can see how for 1976 this might have scanned as punk or metal or whatever. But you listen to Black Sabbath, the song, you listen to the entire Paranoid album, you listen to Master of Reality from 1971, which is basically the first stoner metal record. And also, like, Master of Reality, that's the one where they really down-tuned. It's like, that album is through and through stoner and doom metal. Like, there's doom elements on the first two Sabbath records, but Master of Reality is like, you can put it right next to Sleep and Electric Wizard, as well as like all the sludge and grunge and stuff that was all tied to that. Like, how is Master of Reality from 1971? It could have come out 20 years later or even 30 years later and probably still be seen as groundbreaking.
Give us 5 songs to introduce us to all aspects of Black Sabbath.
Okay. So in chronological order, you have to start with the song Black Sabbath, because again, like, that riff, that's got to be maybe the best track one, LP one riff ever in any style of music, rock music. They invent an entire genre with one riff. I mean, we're kind of eulogizing Ozzy, and obviously the riff is Tony Iommi's, but it's also the thing about Black Sabbath, and I digress again, is that they're one of those bands that all 4 members are like heroes. When people make up dream supergroups in their head, you end up with lineups like Black Sabbath. Like, you have one of the greatest guitar players of all time, one of the most iconic singers of all time. Geezer Butler as a bass player is like, if you haven't listened carefully to the interplay between Geezer Butler's bass lines and Tony Iommi's riffs, like, the reason these Sabbath songs sound as magical as they do, so much because of that. Like, they only have one guitar player. There's no rhythm and lead, but Geezer Butler is like doing these counterpoints that are so creative. And then Bill Ward is like an unbelievable drummer. Like, so many bands that would have written the Iron Man riff would have given it some like really kind of just typical rock beat. Like, you see that all the time. You see all these like great classic rock riffs over these like fairly simple, straightforward 4 on the floor type beats. And Bill Ward doesn't do that at all. Like, his drumming is like, you would never expect what he does on these songs. So they're one of those bands. So to answer the 5-song question, the song Black Sabbath by the band Black Sabbath from the album Black Sabbath invents an entire genre in one song, and then they go on to lead a career that backs up the thesis, basically, of that song. You don't see that a lot. I'm going to skip including anything from the album Paranoid, because I think that it's such a perfect album and it's full of their most popular songs. I'm just going to keep going. I guess Sweet Leaf from Master of Reality, also track 1 on that record, because I think that, I mean, the whole album basically invents stoner and doom metal. I mean, you could easily pick Into the Void, you could pick Children of the Grave, But I think the Sweet Leaf riff is just like, and then Ozzy coughing, everything about that song is that's a song where I would put like a good 25 years ahead of its time at any given moment. I think if that song would have come out during the grunge era, it would have been all over the radio. If Sweet Leaf would have been like all over the radio in the 70s, then bands like Sleep and Electric Wizard would have seemed more obviously retro than they were when they came out. I think the reason that stoner metal was able to become a genre is because Black Sabbath's like more quote stoner metal songs went a little bit under the radar in real time. So it was kind of like this thing to discover, even though the band is so well known, even though Ozzy was Ozzy's name, like he's more well known than Black Sabbath. He's probably more well known than any of his songs are, even before the reality TV show, I think, just because he's like a entity. So then I would say Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, which is a song like nothing else. And this is a perfect example of metal bands that aim to be like Sabbath just aren't, because the song is half the heaviest thing you've ever heard and then half really light. And you just don't see metal bands do that really the way that song does. And then also it has what is effectively a breakdown, just crazy for 1973. I would have to say, if you're looking for the scope of Black Sabbath, the song Changes, because I think that like, here's this evil, dark, heavy metal band that just wrote one of the most beautiful ballads of all time. And also metal bands doing ballads is such a thing, of course, like it's been a thing for a long time, but Sabbath did it in a way that completely avoided ever seeming like token power ballad. I mean, I like some metal band power ballads, but by the 80s, by like the hair and glam metal era, it too often felt like you had to have this cheesy song to get on MTV in order to be successful as a metal band. And nothing is cheesy about Changes. It's just beautiful. And it's such an outlier for them. It's just kind of unbelievable that they also were so good at that. So that's 4. And then 5th song I'm going to choose is Symptom of the Universe from Sabotage, because I think when you do start getting into thrash and speed metal, you wouldn't be able to have that style of music if not for the influence of Symptom of the Universe, which is a song that when I first heard it, which probably would have been in the early 2000s, I was absolutely blown away, because I was just like, even after already knowing that Black Sabbath were so ahead of their time, I still couldn't believe they wrote that in like 1976, maybe 1975. I was just like, whoa. And I guess like the song Paranoid, I said I wasn't going to talk about the album Paranoid. That song would be like important to mention for the development of thrash and speed metal. But I think Symptom of the Universe took it to a new level. And I think that song in particular would still blow the minds of any aggressive, fast metal or hardcore or any type of like heavy music listener that likes music that's aggressive and fast. I think Symptom of the Universe still kicks the ass of whatever you're putting it up against.
All right, well, on a less heavy note, why don't we talk about albums that came out this week?
So as hinted at earlier, we should start with the new Tyler, the Creator album, Don't Tap the Glass, which before Ozzy passed, I think this would have been the biggest music news of the week, because Tyler, like you had said earlier, like he's in the middle of his Chromacopia tour. And I forget if I said this on the podcast, but I definitely wrote it in my review of the MSG show. But it's like Tyler really has been leaning into these distinctly different eras. Like he has different costumes each album cycle, and the live shows reflect the imagery of the record. And so for him to just surprise drop an entirely new album in the middle of a different album's tour that doesn't end for a few months, it's pretty unlike him, I guess. And also he prefaced the album being like, this album, like it's no concept, nothing, like, because his at least last 3 albums have been these concept albums, and this new one he's very much like it's not. But even that being said, it's like he can't help himself. Like it does kind of have like, you know, there is some pretty clear imagery with both the album cover and the music video for Stop Playing With Me. He did that surprise show or some like announced last minute show under the K Bridge in Brooklyn. And he basically, like, the stage setup looked like the music video. So it's like he once again has a whole set of visuals, and it's very like stripped back like the album itself. And then the album even kind of has this sort of, not like a thematic through line, but sort of like an overall message of Tyler basically is like, he wants people to move, he wants people to dance. He did this big statement where he was like, I've heard from some friends that they don't want to dance in public because they're afraid of being filmed and turned into a meme. And he's like, that's so sad that we have to like, we're afraid of this natural human expression because we're afraid of somebody filming us. And it's like, it's a good point for our current technological era and the social media and all that kind of stuff. So Tyler, who handles most of his own production, he produced the whole thing himself. There definitely are straight up dance beats on it. But also, like, another thing that stood out to me is I feel like Chromacopia was not as much of like he definitely raps on it, but it doesn't feel just like a classic like beats and rapping rap album. And I feel like he has doing more of that on this too, which kind of like makes for a really nice follow-up to his verse on the Clips album, because on the Clips record, Tyler gives like one of his best rap verses, like straight up rap verses ever, and like really ever. And it's like, it just kind of like, he takes moments like that and like his verse on the West Side Gun album, Pray for Paris, from a few years ago, to just kind of like remind the world that he's also an amazing rapper, even though he chooses to kind of do a lot of other stuff with his music. And so I feel like coming off that Clips verse, there's definitely a few songs in this record where it feels like he's just like rapping his ass off. And I love to hear Tyler do that. And it seemed like something he was having a lot of fun doing at the MSG show too. So I think it's like there's a couple kind of themes around this record. Like, it's a dance record. It's more of like a rapping rap record. And then there's just like those songs like that, because again, Tyler can't help himself. There are just songs that sound as massive as the big hits from Chromacopia and Flower Boy and Igor, like the more melodic Tyler songs, because he can apparently just like churn songs like that out. No problem. Like, he makes it look effortless. So I just think he's on such an incredible run right now. And for him to drop this, like, it's 10 songs, 28 and a half minutes, it almost feels more like a mixtape in comparison to what he's been doing. And yet it still just instantly like lands as one of the most monumental rap albums of the year. It reminds me a little bit of Kendrick doing GNX, which was that same thing where like, it felt like Kendrick was like, let's just do beats and rapping and, get like drop the whole conceptual stuff. And then it just still is one of the biggest and best rap albums of recent memory, because it's Kendrick who everything he touches turns to gold, and it's just like he's so on fire right now. So yeah, it's a really, really amazing album, I think.
Definitely.
So Tyler, that's the big album of the week, but there's also a bunch of others. The other really anticipated rap album, especially for us this week, is Freddie Gibbs and the Alchemists doing a sequel to Alfredo, which was their 2020 album we loved. That was actually our Brooklyn Vegan's number 2 album of 2020. And now they're back with Alfredo 2. It scratches the same itch as the original. It's really good. Another Tyler with an album out this week is Tyler Childers, who, similar to Tyler the Creator, is like an arena headliner despite not really having a massive hit that everybody knows, and also like definitely playing by his own rules. Like, he's a country star, but definitely seems to ignore all the kind of confines of mainstream country. I mean, we were talking a little bit on the last episode about the whole indie country thing, and how then there's also like these country stars that like act indie, and he's definitely one of them. This record's great. Rick Rubin produced it, and I think, I mean, the amount of classic albums produced by Rick Rubin is pretty unbelievable. I know some people criticize his style, but it feels very much like a Rick Rubin production. Like, no frills, very loud. Speaking of indie country, Ryan Davis and the Roadhouse Band, who we talked about on the last episode, their new record, New Threats from the Soul, is out this week. It's really good. Listen to last week's episode to hear us talk more about that. Bone Flower, who are a band from Madrid, who kind of do like melodic post-hardcore that's very in touch with Screamo. Their new album Reveries is out. It's their first for Death Wish, and Jeremy Bone from Touche Amore appears on it. Jeremy also included a Bone Flower track on his 2023 compilation Ballad Years Redefined. So if you like Touche Amore, you're going to like Bone Flower if you haven't heard them. Going back to the whole indie country Americana thing, I think we were talking a little bit about like some predecessors to that. You probably have to include Kurt Weill as someone who kind of did help steer things in that direction. Also, way more underrated than Kurt Weill, but Luke Roberts is somebody that I always felt when I first heard MJ Lenderman, actually, I was like, this guy kind of reminds me of Luke Roberts. I don't know if anybody else can ever think that, but Kurt has always been one of Luke's biggest supporters, loudest champions. They've collaborated before. They have a new EP out together called Classic Love. Super cool. It's all based around a song that Luke wrote called Classic Love, and they do it together. They duet on it, and then Kurt has his own version of the track. And it also includes a new version of a song from Kurt's 2008 album, Constant Headmaker. It includes Kurt's cover of a Beach House song. Really cool stuff. Scalp having a record out called Not Worthy of Human Compassion. And if you like really heavy stuff, like anything from death metal to power violence to grindcore, Scalp is like right in that Venn diagram of all that kind of stuff. Speaking of super heavy bands that you might not immediately see the through line to Black Sabbath, I'm sure every member of Scalp has been, massively influenced by Sabbath, despite being way more caustic. Folk Bitch Trio have their debut album out. They're from Melbourne. Their album is called Now Would Be a Good Time. If you like harmony-fueled folk, you should check that out. And Indigo D'Souza has a record out called Precipice. And if you like poppy, fun indie rock, you should check that out. We've got reviews of all of those on BrooklynVegan.com and notable releases. And then over in Indie Basement, Bill reviews Paul Weller's new covers album, which has collaborations with Robert Plant, Noel Gallagher, and more. The new collaborative album from Luke Haynes of the Auteurs and Peter Buck of REM. Corey Hansen of Wan's new solo record, and Dot Allison's remix album of 2023's Consciousology. Also, good amount of new songs this week, including one that I listened to on repeat this morning. Hayley Williams put out a new solo single called Mirtazapine. It is named after the antidepressant, and the song is basically an ode to that antidepressant. It's sort of like a personified, I guess I want to say love song, but it's all about this drug. And it's super, super 90s, like shoegaze guitars, alt rock, power pop, like chorus. Like it just kind of reminded me of anything from Garbage to the Smashing Pumpkins to the Breeders, all in that ballpark. And super cool to hear Hayley doing that kind of thing. Another song I know Dave and I are both into is Pat Flynn from Fiddlehead and Sean Costa, the drummer of Fiddlehead, and also Pat's hardcore band Have Heart. Like they've played together in a bunch of bands, also including Free and Sweet Jesus. They have a new band called How Much Art, which also includes members of Gel and Downtalker and others. And they just announced their debut EP, Public Relations, and put out the first single, PR. I like it a lot, Dave. I think you like it too.
Definitely. It's like Fiddlehead with synths, a little more post-punk. And I really like the additional vocals that Maddie provides in the song. So looking forward to hearing the rest of that EP out on Convulse.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that because Pat Flynn just has like Fiddlehead and Have Heart are pretty big, but then there are all these other Pat Flynn bands that are just on the smaller side and like don't seem to pop off. And I wondered if How Much Art would be that, but hearing how instantly catchy this song is, like it's almost, I might like it better than most of the last Fiddlehead record. I'm kind of wondering if this band is maybe going to be like the third band on the list of big Pat Flynn bands. I mean,
but the more unknown bands all came before Fiddlehead took off, right?
But after Have Heart.
I know, but there seemed to be this period of Pat Flynn obscurity between Have Heart and Fiddlehead.
Yeah, I mean, even the first Fiddlehead EP was like, didn't pop off. And the band never, I think they intended to release that EP and break up. Like Pat was just doing these like short-lived bands. So
yeah. So now Fiddlehead got big. The Have Heart reunion is like the biggest thing ever.
Right. I feel like now he's maybe too big to do something low key.
Right.
But it seems like he's trying to make it more low key. Like, the rollout of the band was pretty subtle. They opened some shows for MS Paint. I mean, they're on a smaller label. Like I'm sure that if Fiddlehead's on Run for Cover, I'm sure How Much Art could be on a bigger label if they wanted to. I would imagine they're on Convulse because they think Convulse is cool and they want to be part of it. But
you definitely have to wonder how many people in the MS Paint crowds for those two recent shows they opened even realized that like the 8 p.m. opener frontman is somebody who also sometimes headlines to thousands of people.
Right. It wasn't billed as like members of Fiddlehead and Have Heart or something. Like it seemed like they were trying to play some shows and stay a little under the radar. Like it, and obviously because it's Pat and Sean and now also Maddie, who we didn't know at the time, but now do know that, there's no way that they can stay under the radar for long. So especially not with a song that's catchy. I'm really into it.
Yeah, and I do think it was very purposeful that they hit up MS Paint about opening. You know, MS Paint also not a very traditional band with keyboards, and
also on Convulse.
Oh, true. So yeah, it seems like, you know, it never goes to Pat's head. He's probably was so excited to get to open for MS Paint with his new project.
I think he called them like his current favorite band.
There you go.
Yeah. And, you know, I get that. MS Paint's amazing. So cool.
Definitely.
Another song by a band that we both like is, I mean, everything's coming back to indie country lately, but this band Shallow Water, they call themselves West Texas Dirt Gaze. And I guess I hadn't fully thought of them in the context of like the kind of indie country thing, even though it makes sense. Dirt gaze, obviously, like kind of, you know, pulling from country and shoegaze. But they made this new record with Alex Farrar, who is the producer on all the MJ Lenderman and Wednesday records and a lot of other stuff in that world. And so because of that, now I'm like, wait, are they in that world too? Or like starting to be? And this new song, Highway, it's like almost 6 minutes long, and it's just like really awesome mix of like slowcore and some alt country and some grunge, and it definitely feels like if we were to reassess that list we made, I could see this band being a big contender, especially with this new song.
Yeah. And did you mention emo in there too? Because I feel like that last album.
Oh yeah, this new song didn't sound very emo to me.
Right, but then I do think I was hearing like Sunny Day on the last album, which I love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely like, you know, it's all in that same kind of melting pot. Another song that's hard not to talk about is that Bright Eyes released a ska song,
which I thought was a joke at first, but actually happened.
Yeah. It's called First World Blues. They basically called it an homage to like all waves of ska or something. And, you know, they were like, we're just happy to add something to the bin that has everything from like Desmond Decker to Tim Armstrong, showing their ska chops or, you know, or bona fides, you know, they're serious about this. But to me, it mainly sounds like a two-tone song. The video is also black and white, so that helps. Or at least it kind of sometimes sounds like the Rancid songs that are trying to be two-tone songs. So it's like two-tone / maybe some Rancid. But yeah, it's really good. I mean, it's no surprise because they did it with Alex Levine from So Glows, and Connor obviously has Desaparecidos, who are like a punk band. It does not surprise me in the slightest that he is into ska also. But
yeah, and Bright Eyes no stranger to horns either.
Good point. Some other quick shout outs. Sound of Animals Fighting announced their first album in 17 years, first new music in 3 years, because they had an EP in 2022 called Lady of the Cosmos. No, sorry, that's the name of the song. The album's called The Maiden. The song's called Lady of the Cosmos. Fuckers put out a song called Play Me. Thrice announced a new album called Horizons West. The new song Nash is super heavy. It's like Thrice in sludge metal mode. We actually have an exclusive vinyl variant of that one in our store. Which, speaking of, we also have an exclusive vinyl variant of the new Acacia Strain record, who they announced that this past week. Their first single, A Call Beyond, is out. Daniel Avery, who's been in the electronic scene for a while and now signed to Domino and has a new album coming out with all kinds of interesting guests. Everyone from Alison Mosshart of The Kills to Walter Schreifels of Quicksand to Yule. So
I've been waiting for Walter and Yule to finally appear on an album together.
I know, me too.
This was welcome
finally.
News.
And the single features Andy Bell from Ride on guitar, as well as Cecil Believe on vocals. And Hatebreed's first song in 5 years is out. It's called Make the Demons Obey. Well, that's all we're going to mention on the new music front. But what else happened this week, Dave? Stevie
Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham's pre-Fleetwood Mac album, Buckingham Nicks, is getting a long-awaited reissue, as we first kind of found out via a billboard that showed the album cover that got people talking. It's been unavailable for decades. Deftones have announced the lineup of their Dia de los Deftones Festival, and this year it's amazing as usual with Clips, Two Hollis, Rico Nasty, Def Heaven, Eka Vandal, Glare, and more. They're just with these lineups, they just always seem so cool and so connected and so not really caring what the haters think about having, hip hop open for themselves. So those are always cool and fun. Converge also just announced their own fest. This one's called Saddest Day, and it's going down in their hometown of Boston on December 13th with Touche Amore, Coalesce, The Hope Conspiracy, Soul Glow, Year of the Knife, Stress Positions, Wormwood, and a special guest still to be announced. That's very Converge lineup right there. Two of hardcore's biggest and best from the Bay Area, Tsunami and Scal, having previously announced big shows in California and New York, now revealed a full tour together. And meanwhile, Scal, who are always out playing shows, have been doing a Smashing Pumpkins cover, which just happened to come at the same time as My Chemical Romance doing a Smashing Pumpkins cover on the shows that they just started playing again. And Billy Corgan himself has praised both of them. Jawbreaker announced a full tour with some amazing openers. I think some of us are going to be heading to the Best Friends Forever Fest this fall, which Jawbreaker are on, as are Texas is the Reason. Now Texas are opening some shows for Jawbreaker on this just announced tour, as are the Get Up Kids, who are going to be playing Something to Write Home About. Get Up Kids, of course, headlined Best Friends Forever last year. And Bratmobile, who are opening for Jawbreaker at 2 New York City shows, which is amazing. I mean, Bratmobile's reunion, they just played their own huge shows, and now we have Jawbreaker and Bratmobile on the same bill. And Bully also opening some of those Jawbreaker shows. It varies by date, so check out the dates. 2 80s legends have left us this week, and I don't just mean Ozzy Osbourne, of course. Rest in peace to Theo from The Cosby Show, aka Malcolm Jamal Warner, who died very tragically due to a current in the ocean. And we just found out WWF wrestling icon Hulk Hogan has passed away. Rest in peace, Hulk. Although the last few years have been a little rough, with he's out there campaigning for Trump, and he's also helped bring down the website Gawker, which is, a media brand we feel very conflicted about. But Hulk Hogan's still an 80s wrestling legend. Can't take that away from him. Rest in peace, Hulk. And I think we will talk to you next week.
Thanks for tuning in. Dave and I will be back every Friday morning with new episodes of BV Weekly. And in between the episodes, you can always get much more from us at BrooklynVegan.com, on all of our social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. You can pick up records from us at shop.brooklynvegan.com. And if you like what you hear, tell your friends about us, subscribe to the show, give us a good rating. All that little stuff goes a really long way. It really helps us a lot, and we really appreciate it. So until then, thank you again, and see you next time.